get going, we're going to start with just a little bit of an overview of the agenda. So just a slide or two about who we are at Insight Rocket, why data democratization is important, today's alternatives and the challenges that people face regarding data democratization, introducing this concept of interactive storytelling as a new piece in the puzzle, a little demo of that feature, and some closing thoughts. So just a little bit about ourselves. We were founded in 2010, and really it was in order to bring the power of data warehousing and business intelligence to this realm of marketing and digital analytics, where we saw that there were a lot of very custom and custom-built proprietary solutions, and we wanted to really open up all of the possibilities of the world of business intelligence to the marketing analytics community. So we've focused a lot on trying to seamlessly blend some of the best-in-class technologies in those spaces. We're very focused on marketing and digital analytics, and as I mentioned before, we're really talking a lot about this idea of interactive storytelling and where it fits in. So just in terms of other info about us, you know, we work with a number of major customers. Here are some of the brands that we're currently working with, and we really are enjoying learning every step of the way. So with that, we'll talk a little bit more about data democratization and what it really means. So let's start with a definition, because I don't think that there's really a lot of discussion about this yet. So here's a definition we've come up with, which is really allowing everyone in the organization to directly benefit from any of the data that can lead to improved effectiveness without the need for intermediaries. So let's talk about this idea of without the need for intermediaries. So lots of organizations have a wealth of data, and there's this idea that oftentimes analysts need to be the gatekeepers to really make that data usable, understandable, and while analysts are crucial to any organization and their role is not going to go away, you know, there's a lot of reasons to really think about ways of taking away that intermediary of the analyst and letting the people that really could do something with the data directly gain access to it. And that's what we're really going to be talking about a lot in this webinar. So why is it important? Well, here's a fascinating statistic I saw at a conference last year. 61% of marketers don't even use marketing analytics to influence their organization's behavior or actions. Now, that's how they actually answered a survey that this company, Demand Metric Research, sent to them. So really, amazing given where we are in the evolution of marketing analytics, that end of the day, a lot of times people are just really using their gut, using their instincts, and there's something that's preventing them from really relying on analytics to the degree that a lot of us think that they should be able to. So the other flip side of that is this interesting statistic. This is that by 2018, there would be this enormous shortage, and I think the attribution's wrong. It's not from Demand Metric. It's actually from another organization. But that you're talking about almost 200,000 people that were short in the United States in terms of having those analytical skills. And you can see why having them as intermediaries is kind of a problem, right? Because you can't really train and hire enough analysts to mediate between the data and the people that want access to the data, and it's only going to get more difficult to hire and train enough of those workers. So where does that kind of lead us? Well, even if we had enough analysts, the problem is that, having those intermediaries can inhibit speed, creativity, and really get in the way of the process. Now, there's nothing better than great teamwork where you've got analysts working with decision makers side by side. They're fully available to them, they understand things, and that can be absolutely wonderful, but it's not a realistic option for most organizations to have that kind of availability of analysts. And so, you know, people being able to, you know, see the data, react to it, ask a question that comes to their mind, and act on that question that popped into their mind immediately without having to then get on the phone, send an email. That's what we're really talking about with data democratization. So where are we really today with most organizations? Well, decision makers, what we've seen, they generally do need help today from analysts when important questions arise. They're not trying to answer them themselves with whatever kinds of data access tools they may have. And then on the other side of the spectrum, most analysts actually need help from IT, programmers and the like, to really kind of visualize and access new types of data. So that there's multiple roles involved sometimes in trying to really free the data, make it available. So one of the things I wanted to do actually right now is just do a quick poll of where all of you feel that you are in terms of how far along you are with democratizing data. So I'm going to go ahead and share a little poll for you. And just take a moment here to try to share where you feel your organization is with this. And we'll then show the results to everybody in a moment. Okay, it looks like most people have voted, maybe not everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and just share that to keep things moving along. So, one second. Let me just share with you what people had to say about that. And looks like people are actually taking steps towards data democratization, which is great to hear. And let's just go ahead and hide that and move back to talking a little more about, you know, let's really kind of dig deeper into this question of democratization. So we found that it's really helpful to think in terms of personas, or as I kind of put it here, citizens in the data democracy. And they each have distinct needs and strengths. So you've got those programmers, IT, you have data scientists, which are kind of a new player in the space in the last 5 years or so, or at least they have a new name for themselves. Analysts. Knowledge workers is a term that Peter Drucker coined way back in the 50s, but I think it really applies here, and information consumers. So before we move off of this slide, I want to just try to define a couple of these and help you in thinking about how they fit with your organization. So data scientists, for those of you that don't already have people in your organization that are calling themselves that, typically they understand statistics, advanced analytics, and have some ability to do some programming for themselves, typically. They generally can gain access directly to databases or work with raw text files as needed. Analyst is a more familiar concept, and some of the analysts have some coding abilities, might be able to write some SQL code. Oftentimes, though, that's not expected of data analysts. They certainly are expected to know Excel well. Knowledge workers and how they're different from information consumers, it's really the idea that these are the people that are comfortable with and willing to get their hands a little bit dirty with the data. They're the people that really, if they were given more access to the data, they would use it in their decision-making processes. And then information consumers are really the more passive people that we see in large numbers in organizations, right, where they're willing to receive a presentation and read it over, but they haven't really embraced things in a hands-on way the way the knowledge workers have. So what kind of resources can do these people have at their disposal potentially if they were given access? And you can see a whole range of them here, including actual raw data, data warehouses, spreadsheets, reports, dashboards, specialized platforms like Google Analytics or Adobe Marketing Cloud, data visualization software like Tableau, and we'll be showing them of that a little in a moment, and then actual analyst-created presentations. So you have all these different resources, and not everybody necessarily should have access to each of them. So is this whole topic of data democratization as simple as just giving appropriate access to the right things on, the data resources on the left to the people on the right? Do we just kind of just come up with a mapping like this and say, okay, these are the people that should have these access. We'll give them some training, some documentation, and then we're done. We've sort of succeeded at data democratization. Well, unfortunately, it's really a lot harder than that. And so the reason it's harder is that a lot of times these people cannot independently, safely, efficiently use those resources and find out what they need to know. The combination of what is simple enough for them to use, and what it provides is unsatisfying to them. So something may be simple, but it's not flexible. It may not have depth to it. And so we really, it gets us into a situation where we either need to improve upon those data resources or develop some new ones. And what happens if you, kind of pair people with the wrong sorts of resources? Certainly they can waste time and effort. They can get frustrated. You can have databases that, novices are sending queries to that are getting bogged down, or other platforms that resources are being consumed of. And then you might have people really sharing false interpretations of the data. And I was at a conference recently where someone told a very vivid story of how they were walking past a conference room and listening to someone completely misinterpret some of the data that they sort of figured out for some ideas about for themselves without the benefit of a central analytics team. And so these are the risks. We all understand what the benefits are of unleashing the power of that data and having a much broader set of people get their hands on it, but we have to mitigate these risks as well. So let's talk a little bit about this again, about this concept of kind of knowledge workers and who they are in the organization, and what we have to do to try to help them be more effective. And so I think about some of the people that I personally work with, and sometimes these people are really senior, yet they want to get their hands on the data. It's actually, I think, really impressive. I can think of, for instance, when we're working with our customer MetLife, some senior VPs that don't want just a presentation where they can't drill down into the data. They want to actually, kind of interrogate it for themselves, and they want to be able to really, formulate new questions for themselves by accessing the data. So we want to really take these knowledge workers and help them become more effective and efficient, because they're really a key to making the whole organization work better, and then convert more of the passive information consumers into knowledge workers. So this is what was on that kind of diagram before about the types of data that knowledge workers might, in fact, be given access to. The ones that are dashed are, in some cases, kind of an iffy match for them. It really is kind of data access that's meant mostly perhaps for other people, but sometimes is given to knowledge workers. And so what we want to do is, I think, just talk about some of the pros and cons of each of these and whether they can be improved enough to get knowledge workers as effective and as efficient as we want them to be. So let me just get here. So let's talk about spreadsheets for the moment. So the spreadsheets are obviously here to stay. They're ubiquitous. They're flexible. They're the bread and butter of analysts. But spreadsheets have a lot of challenges that come with them. Minimal interactivity. You can do a little interactivity, but it's pretty limited, or it starts to become very complex to put together. The data visualizations are generally weak. There's really an error-prone quality to spreadsheets where, especially when they get complicated, there can be lots of hidden errors that people don't realize are buried in them. From an IT perspective, this is really a problem for data governance, to have lots of complex spreadsheets that are floating around on people's desktops without change control, without really kind of the types of QA that are given to more formal systems in the world of BI. Sharing them can be a challenge, and then in terms of scalability, beyond a certain amount of rows, a certain amount of data, spreadsheets tend to bog down and really become a serious problem. So as I was saying before, for a knowledge worker, yes, they're going to use spreadsheets, but I'm personally not that optimistic that improvements in spreadsheets are going to get us to that next level of data democratization and enablement that we're really aiming for. Reports, whether they be emailed out once a day, once a week, or someone goes and requests reports, not too many people think of reports as an endpoint. It's a resource that you put together with other things. A lot of systems have reports, whether it be Salesforce.com or you name the system. There's usually some reports available. They can often be very detailed and have thousands of rows of information and lots of columns, but they almost always, by definition, are kind of siloed and narrow. Those hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of rows are kind of overly verbose. Oftentimes when people talk about reports, they're not really looking at data visually, which oftentimes unlocks a lot of the patterns. It can be noisy, and when people say they're sharing reports, they're not generally sharing interpretation with them. So reports is also not really the way forward in most people's minds. So the next thing to talk about is dashboards, and that's where a lot of people are focused. That's probably the most common request that we get. People say, hey, we want better dashboards. We want sexier dashboards. We want dashboards. And sure, they're visual. They're by their name, they tend to be interactive. They tend to be broader than reports, where they can combine different types of data. Those are all good things. So what is wrong with dashboards, and why might they not be the way forward for those knowledge workers to be greater in number and to really be more effective? Well, people really they put a lot of effort into getting the perfect dashboard, and they can be really expensive to create. Now, we're going to be talking about Tableau a little bit more in a moment, and Tableau can be a way to create them more cost effectively and more quickly, but most often dashboards, they take a lot of effort. They're not agile. As the organization is changing, people don't have the funding and resources to go back and constantly update those dashboards because they took so much trouble to create in the first place. We see a lot of dashboards out there that don't have a lot of depth, where they're kind of nice on the surface, but you try and kind of drill into those bars and charts and things, and you can't get to granular data from those dashboards oftentimes. They're just kind of a pretty face, sort of, without a lot behind it. Some dashboards is a place for interpretation that people leave little sections in the dashboard where people can put a sentence or two, but it's pretty minimal compared to the amount of interpretation that the data truly needs usually. And the overall ROI of dashboards really is something that we all, I think, need to keep a close eye on, because if you almost sort of fetishize them and you say, you know, we want this dashboard to be beautiful and perfect and do all these things, it becomes like a lot of those BI projects that we all hear horror stories about, where by the time that you get done with it, you've exhausted your funding, and people are on to the next question. They're on to the next topic, yet you created this dashboard for yesterday's questions. And so, I think dashboards are a very valuable part of the mix that should stay in the mix, but we need to get more agile in creating them, and instead of trying to make beautiful, perfect, wonderful dashboards that are going to last for a year or two, think of them a little bit more like an agile, almost disposable kind of a resource that if you can create them efficiently, then they become much more valuable. The next kind of topic to talk about is these specialized platforms like Google Analytics. A lot of us are from the marketing world of marketing and digital. So Google Analytics, or let's say the Adobe Marketing Cloud and the like, these can be really powerful platforms. They can have some analytics that some of the BI companies really kind of envy, that they are able to, in the speed that they do it, with the usability they have, come up with answers. So they're not to be discounted, and they often have a very tightly integrated flavor to them, right? That they're responsible for the data integration and the storage of the data and analysis of it and the presentation of it, and that's to be that's very valuable. But if we're thinking in terms of having these knowledge workers who are not dedicated analysts logging into, let's say, Adobe Site Catalyst or logging into Google Analytics, is that the way forward? Oftentimes there's a really limited breadth of data where the business questions that they want to answer require data that extends beyond these platforms. And some of these companies would like you to send them more and more of your data, but that may not be the right path forward for you to send so many varied types of data, or try to send so many varied types of data into these specialized platforms. They have some flexibility, but it tends to be more limited than the solutions that are in the broader, more general BI space. There can be a lot of complexity behind them, where people need to go to significant training to go beyond the basics. And these platforms, although there's sometimes opportunities for annotation, they don't tend to lend themselves to mixing the data with interpretation. And so therefore, they really kind of have that, only the data, you have to interpret the data for yourselves kind of a problem in the context of data democratization, and just giving this knowledge worker their login to Site Catalyst or Google Analytics or the like. Which takes us now to talking a little bit more about data visualization, and our favorite platform in the data visualization space is Tableau, and it got billing in the title of the webinar. And we really do think that software like Tableau is an absolute breakthrough, but typically more so for analysts than these non-analyst knowledge workers. For analysts, it's really allowed them to do much more without having to involve IT and programmers than they've ever been able to do before. So they're really powerful platforms. They're flexible, much more flexible potentially than some of those specialized solutions. But there are some things to be considered that are not insignificant, like it being a new skill to learn. I can't tell you how many times I've encountered people who said that they are intrigued by Tableau, they think they want to do it, but they just can't imagine taking the time after they've gotten so good at Excel to learning a complementary technology that overlaps with it in some ways. And then there's an availability question. It's like, pretty much everybody's got Excel, but not everybody has a copy of Tableau Desktop Enterprise Edition or the like, and there's an expense to be considered there. This next point is not always, kind of obvious to people. They're just getting started with products like Tableau, which is the dependence on the structure of the available data. So what we find is that people that kind of see a demo of Tableau and they maybe work with some of the prepackaged demo data that comes with Tableau if you do one of the 2-week trials, they think it's great, but then they try to then apply it to their various sorts of data, whether it be coming from their databases or from their spreadsheets, and suddenly it becomes a lot more difficult to very quickly drag and drop your way to a great data visualization or dashboard. And so that's not an insurmountable problem, but it is one that needs to be recognized and managed. And then there's really kind of limited room for interpretation. Certainly in Tableau, if you're going to use it as a way to present findings and the data visualizations, it's possible. There's certainly, you can put text wherever you want to, but we feel it doesn't lend itself so much to sharing the interpretation of the data in words within its kind of format. I want to take a moment to do a second poll now, since we're starting to talk about Tableau a little bit, and find out really, for the people on the webinar, what your familiarity or exposure is with Tableau. So go ahead and help out with this survey, and we'll share what you and your fellow attendees have to say about it. Great. I'm going to go ahead and share the results now. It looks like the majority of you have had the opportunity to answer. So a lot of people have seen it. Majority, 53%, saw a demo of it or watched a coworker use it or the like. But and then there's this core group of people that are further along. So kind of, a real mix. And I think that I'm hoping that what we're going to share through the next few minutes is going to, I think, be interesting to both sets of people. So the next thing I want to go ahead and let me just hide that and go to the next slide. So the next thing are analyst presentations. And again, the context here is we're talking about data democratization and those knowledge workers that will want to expand the kind of army of knowledge workers in your organization that can do things effectively without dependence on always having to pick up the phone or send an email to an analyst. So, analyst presentations where you put together something in PowerPoint or like, they're indispensable. They're kind of some of the most valuable work that's done out there. But that's not really data democratization, right? We were talking about how to, empower people to benefit from data directly. The things that, putting together that sort of a PowerPoint or Word document or the like, they bring enormous benefit in terms of providing context and interpretation. But on the cons, there's an expense. Those take real time for a limited analyst pool to create, and you can only do them on certain topics and only at up to a certain frequency. And they also have the problem of lacking interactivity, and that goes hand in hand with why they're not really data democratization. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people tell me that they get, for instance, some really beautiful and compelling sort of analytics presentations from their agencies that the agency had their creative people help with and to create, and they want their ongoing presentations from their internal team to look just as good, but the data, they have no way to validate the data, to dig into it, to drill into it. So that creates this kind of a challenge and a really an opportunity, we think, that we focused in on. So how do you kind of get those benefits of analyst presentations and try and add back in that interactivity? And that's where we've started to really try to innovate around this idea of interactive storytelling. And so, a lot of us are very familiar with how storytelling is the way to sort of really get people's attention, engage their interest, have high impact, motivate action. Lots of great things out there that you can find about the benefits of storytelling. But we're trying to do this in the world of data and reintroduce that idea of interactivity to the picture. And just a little bit of storytelling inspiration here. One of my colleagues shared with me from someone from University of Houston. I really like this. Stories are just data with a soul. So, I think that we all can benefit from somehow carving out the time to putting our data in the context of stories. And so often that's really difficult to do because we're so busy with all the other aspects of just pulling the data together and making it, kind of digestible. There's little time to put it around a narrative around it, but so much potential value of doing so. So with that, I'm going to flip over to showing you what we've done on this idea of interactive storytelling to see if it, in fact, we think it's at least a start towards something that can make those knowledge workers more enabled and also get some of those passive knowledge consumers to be more knowledge workers. So just kind of flipping over to my web browser, I'm going to show you a little of what we call our Insight Hub platform, which is this blend of Tableau and data warehousing and data integration and a number of other elements. But rather than take too much time about the behind the scenes of it, I want to show you what interactive stories look like so that you can kind of start to think about their potential in this idea of data democratization. So the first thing is to have a central kind of community gathering place for metrics for your organization, whether it be our platform or something you do internally. We think that's really valuable. So each of our subscribers has a portal like this that is private to them, where they know, people know that's the place to go for all of the latest dashboards, all of the latest analyst commentary, all of the reports that they might want to get to. And it's a kind of one-stop shopping for analytics for their part of the organization. So the homepage here is featuring some of these metrics stories, and they're interactive, which is really the concept that I was talking about before. So if I just, let's say, take this very first one about a particular marketing campaign that someone wrote, what we have here, let me just kind of expand my screen a little bit here for you. So this is something that an analyst named Julie put together, and she is telling a story, right? It is a narrative, since the launch in late April, so on and so forth, right? This is what she thinks has happened. And then she illustrated it, but instead of like just taking a screenshot from Excel or from Tableau or something, what she was easily able to do was embed a live data visualization, right? So people can now go into these things and not only hover on them and see additional data that goes beyond what is on the surface, as you can see from this pop-up. They could even potentially drill down and view the underlying data here, right? So I can go ahead and say I want to view the underlying data for this, and that wasn't a good example. I think this one didn't have much underlying data, but but they can then go ahead, change the dates, change whatever kind of attributes the person in Tableau decided to make available, and form their own opinions about what's going on. So that's that interactivity that was missing from those analyst presentations in PowerPoint that we were talking about before. And this is kind of like the entry drug for those people that are not really knowledge workers usually, and they're more passive. Is that in the context of a story, you might be able to get them engaged with the data. And so if I move on here, I can read a little bit more of what Julie had to say and go on to the next page. And she might have a totally unrelated data visualization. In this case, it's from our reporting system that is highlighting some of the areas where things were atypical, let's say, and may go on now to the next page of it. And this is something that Julie put together in Excel, and she's sharing it because it helps understand the topic, and it was inefficient for her perhaps to try to use Tableau or the data warehouse to illustrate this. She's decided to stick with Excel in figuring that out. And so while it has the interactivity we were talking about, it also has the ability to just take the whole thing as a single embedded story and send this out to to colleagues or a broader audience. And it's got those multiple different elements that call in the data visualization, the spreadsheet software, the reporting, gets it all into one bundle, and they have a link back when they get that, let's say on their mobile device, where they can still interact with the story. And it's that interaction that I want to actually kind of talk about a little bit more. So if I go maybe even go take a look at this next story about Peru, same concept, right, of combining sort of visuals and data and words. And while someone's reading this, they might want to actually kind of interact with it a little bit more in the context of the narrative, right? So they might say, well, I just want to look at certain sectors that receive this AdWords information and look at it by clicks instead of impressions. And at that point, I might have something that is very different than what the author began with when they started to write this story, but it gives that, it really unlocks the potential of the audience to participate. And so here, for instance, once they've kind of come up with this unique, their own way of looking at it on a, one thing they might do is just want to share what they've done with this, where they've changed things a bit and maybe changed the dates a little bit. And now go ahead and just email somebody their copy of this very changed visual that's different than what was in the original presentation, but is where their thinking took them. And so all they have to do is go ahead, click on that they want to, share it via email, and then they can send that off, and it'll include a link back to the original unaltered story with the narrative, as well as a link to their changed version so that their colleague can then maybe, kind of like passing a baton, take it from where they left off and change it even further. So beyond that, they could even, if they perhaps were a fellow analyst or author or very kind of a very motivated non-analyst, they could even take their changed version of this and say that they want to now blog about things with this as one of the elements that they want to include. So they didn't originally create this. All they did was modify what they originally were given. So now they have the opportunity to kind of choose amongst the various different views of things that that the original author didn't choose to kind of share. And so maybe they'll share some of those and go ahead and say that they're going to embed that in a new story. And so that they then get to give it a title, write those paragraphs of text around it, and then share it with part of their organization as well. So once again, trying to kind of blend between this idea of a dashboard and a presentation and have something that's a little of both. So now they can go here and, say, my view of AdWords Peru, and go ahead and, format that up and continue to create something that's still interactive and share that out. The last thing I want to do before I open it up to kind of a little bit more of a Q&A and show a couple of more slides to close things out is that this can even become something where people can go even deeper than just drilling to get down to the details within things. So if I go back to that first one we were looking at, well, one of the things that I can do right from within this narrative of Julie's story is not only hover, not only change some of the controls that are provided, like what measure and what date range, but I can actually say I want to get into a more flexible environment without having to be a dedicated analyst and a programmer. Now, this is kind of where I think this is kind of the edge of perhaps where knowledge workers and analysts kind of meet each other, because there's only I think a subset of knowledge workers that would be willing to try to work with this. But if I go ahead and take a look, let's say at here this chart that we were looking at before, right? I can now say, I want to drag and drop instead of the whatever measures here, I want to then, let's say, take and just drag and drop, that I want this to be the cost, let's say, and it now is showing the cost. And if instead of by, day, I want to show it by month, it's got this, really exciting kind of web-based access to the type of thing people normally do with Tableau Desktop. And because of the way we've integrated Tableau Server with the publishing portal, it becomes something they can do in the context of a narrative and a story. And they can use this to further visualize the data, say, well, what are other ways I could look at this data and choose to, view it differently and really experiment with things, and then potentially at the end, save their results and then use that as the basis for a new story or a new view of things. So with that, what I'd like to do is just go back to last couple of slides before I open it up for some questions. And so back to the presentation. As I was showing you, we've tried to kind of put together a lot of different parts of the analytics world into a kind of combined package of best-of-breed components. We don't kind of build our own data warehouses and databases or data visualization software, but try and really kind of come up with this unique blend of things and offer it as a cloud-based subscription. And that's what you kind of see here, where we're combining other technologies. I didn't get to show you some of the predictive analytics using R, which is really exciting to make available for like kind of as a what-if kind of analysis, where people can go to a portal like that and do their own what-if analysis as a knowledge worker and get access to something like the power of R without having to be a data scientist. And so that's kind of a really exciting area that we've been investing and focusing on. So what are we trying to do? We're really, in part, trying to transform analysts into storytellers, and beyond that, as is the theme of this this webinar, trying to, in doing so, cause there to be, a higher percentage of knowledge workers, and to enable them to do more and more. So just some closing thoughts before we get into some of your questions. So data democratization requires commitment. I know in the poll that we did earlier, a number of you said that it's been recognized as an important goal in your organization, and that it is something that you're even working towards. But you have to have that commitment and not just have it be an occasional discussion every few months. you have to understand the personas within your organization. So I shared one model in this presentation, but you might have another sort of model that makes most sense for your organization. And so just like with any sort of marketing, you have to understand your audience. Well, in analytics, you need to understand your audience and really figure out what the right resources are for each persona. Designing from the ground up for democratization, it goes back to what I was sharing with you before about how people so often, they invest so many resources into the perfect dashboard that they maybe weren't even thinking about democratization. So every time you're investing in analytics, ask yourself the question of, am I allowing people to think for themselves and work with the data for themselves? And if not, can I build that in from the into what we are doing? And then the last thing is, and this is often left out, measuring your data democratization progress, so that a lot of us are analytics people, yet we don't apply analytics to how well we're doing at getting people engaged, getting people to use data, and we should absolutely be measuring our own success in this space. So with that, I'm going to just look over some of your questions. We certainly are happy to share the presentation today and stay in touch in the future. So just a little pause now while we look over some of the questions that have been shared today. So one of the questions that I see someone asked is, are the insights here automated, or is the copy editorial written by an analyst? So that's a great question. Everything that you saw today is written by real people. But a topic that we've been researching and talking to people about is whether the sorts of algorithms that have been successfully used in the areas of sports and stocks and weather, do they make sense in this context? And I'd really be interested in hearing from all of you whether you think that there's a place for kind of machine-written verbiage and stories based on data in this world, in your part of the analytics world. We're a little skeptical because of the complexity. It's not quite as closed a solution, a system as let's say sports and weather and the like are, but definitely an interesting topic to continue to talk about. Some other questions. So one person was asking about, how do you get funding, right? So many of us have great ideas, but are confronted with, kind of flat or even constricted funding. And so there's no one answer to that, but I think that, some of the statistics about sort of what the potential power is of data and to transform your organization are readily available, and the statistics about how unavailable analysts are overall, and that technology really needs to play a role so that you don't have to continue to hire more and more analysts, or have, as that initial quote from the presentation showed, have 61% of marketing decisions be made without reference to analytics at all. Those are clear sorts of statistics that can hopefully help with you making a case. But ultimately, you really have to sell that vision, I think, to the management and the people with the purse strings. Another question here. Just trying to kind of catch up with this. A little bit about predictive analytics. And so for predictive analytics, we have focused on R as the place to kind of place our bet. There's a lot of people out there that grew up with SAS and SPSS, but in talking to university professors, we're finding that because of the its availability and at you know, a low price point or no price point, you know, the young generation of people that are advanced analytics professionals are really coming out to the, you know, coming to their positions knowing and loving R. And it's certainly a great environment, not only for doing things like clustering and modeling, but for doing prediction. I'm going to try and just take one more question from the list here and then let you all kind of regroup before the top of the hour. I know a lot of you have back-to-back meetings if you're like us. So the next question was about what is the integration process? You know, how can all sorts of data like CRM, offline, Adobe Analytics get brought together? So data integration is something we do a lot of, and it's something that is very specific to each customer we work with. Some of the customers we work with, we find, have gotten to that next step where they've done a lot of the data integration. They've got a data warehouse, and we're able to kind of focus our efforts on just being a presentation and analytics layer on top of their data warehouse. But if they haven't gotten that far yet, what we have is various kinds of connectors for Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics and Dart DoubleClick and you know, AdWords and Exact Target and so forth that we're able to bring to the party. And then typically there's one or more things that people want integrated that we've never worked with before, but we've been able to really very quickly adapt to them and use some of our existing data connectors to bring them into the data warehouse as well, which then, by layering data integration in the data warehouse underneath Tableau, makes Tableau far easier to use than if you try to use Tableau itself as a way to reach out to these disparate types of data, which can be a really challenging thing, an advanced thing to try to do with Tableau. So I want to thank you all. If we didn't get to your question, we'll definitely, you know, get to you with it, you know, via email. And thanks so much, everybody, for attending, and look forward to staying in touch in the future. Bye-bye.